They brought CM Punk in because he had all this buzz on the internet. They really didn't know what to do with him.
I've been the best ever since day one when I walked into this company, and I've been vilified and hated since that day.
Maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. Maybe you're not the best in the world.
I think CM Punk has turned on the WWE Universe.
There is a glass ceiling, and nobody is allowed to break it.
I got to deal with the CM Punk situation. Right. He quit the WWE 2 days ago. Is that real or is that storyline?
I do not love this anymore. I'm being sick. I'm being hurt. I'm being confused. This is where I belong.
CM Punk made his first WWE appearance on April 2nd, 2006 at WrestleMania 22. Dressed as a member of the Mob, Punk would hang off the side of a car, a part of an elaborate entrance made by the man who would go on to be one of Punk's biggest rivals in the industry. CM Punk is a former ECW champion, a two-time Money in the Bank winner, former Intercontinental Champion, a former Tag Team Champion, three-time World Champion, and is one of the longest reigning WWE Champions of all time. But first, John Cena just turned heel for the first time in 20 years on his last run in WWE. And with this being Cena's last run, I've decided to react to every John Cena movie over on Patreon. So if you're a fan of the content that I do here on YouTube, or wrestling and wrestling related content, consider joining my Patreon, where you can get early access to videos as well as exclusive content that I can't post on YouTube, as well as your name in the credits of videos. Link in the description, and without further ado, let's get into it. Spending years building his name on the independent scene, it was in Ring of Honor after Punk would have feuds with other future legends in the industry such as Samoa Joe and Bryan Danielson. Punk would catch the eye of WWE as he was one of the biggest names in the indies, leading to Punk famously signing his WWE contract on the Ring of Honor Championship. Upon Punk's signing, he was sent to WWE's developmental system, OVW, a move Punk was pretty upset by. However, it was this same move that led to Punk meeting Paul Heyman, a figure that went on to be actually pretty essential in Punk's success. So when WWE relaunched ECW in 2006, Punk was Heyman's first choice as face of the brand, a decision that Vince McMahon decided to turn down and go with Bobby Lashley instead. This leading to tension between Paul Heyman and Vince. However, Punk was still booked pretty strong after debuting. His first match was against Justin Credible on August 1st, with Punk coming out with the win. In fact, he went undefeated for his first few months in ECW, and this established him as one of the top stars, but not the top guy. It wasn't until November 26, 2006 where Punk would have his first pay-per-view match. This was at Survivor Series where Punk teamed up with DX and the Hardy Boys, and they would be facing the team of Rated RKO, Johnny Nitro, Gregory Helms, and Mike Knox. But before the match, while Triple H was doing his usual shtick, the entire crowd was chanting CM Punk. Now they were in Philadelphia, home of ECW, so it does make sense that they were chanting CM Punk. However, this was still a huge feat considering he'd only been on the roster for about 3 months at the time. And this was my first introduction to CM Punk. So when I saw him get more chants than the Hardys, I knew he had to be a big star, or at least was gonna be. The Babyfaces would end up winning the match in a clean sweep, and Survivor Series really lost its steam around this time. Over the following weeks, Punk would qualify for the Elimination Chamber match at December to Dismember, this match also being for the ECW Championship. And this is one of WWE's worst pay-per-views of all time. Punk was heavily favored by both the fans and head of ECW creative Paul Heyman to win the match, but of course, Bobby Lashley was favored by Vince McMahon to win the match, and Punk ended up being the first person eliminated in the match, leaving fans incredibly disappointed and leading to a backstage argument between Paul Heyman and Vince McMahon, also leading to Paul Heyman's departure from the company, leading Vince to treat the entire brand of ECW as a joke, including parading around as its champion wearing a do-rag. Punk would still work weekly matches while still being over with the crowd, and it wasn't until January 9th where Punk would take his first loss to Hardcore Holly, this ending a 6-month undefeated streak. His next major match wasn't until WrestleMania 23 where he competed in the Money in the Bank ladder match, and this match was pretty fun. This was the first time I saw someone get put through a ladder. This was a great opportunity for Punk to shine, however the match was won by Mr. Kennedy. Although this move didn't really work out for him in the end. About a week later, Punk was involved with a feud between the New Breed and the ECW Originals. The New Breed consisting of Elijah Burke, Marcus Corvan, Matt Striker, and Kevin Thorne, versus the ECW Originals Tommy Dreamer, Sandman, Sabu, and RVD. Both teams spent weeks trying to recruit Punk, and he ultimately decided to join the New Breed for about 2 weeks. Then he made a not-so-shocking turn on the New Breed, siding with the ECW Originals. The feud culminated on a 3-on-3 tag team match at One Night Stand, with the Originals taking the win and Punk looking like a bigger star than them all. And later this month, ECW champion Bobby Lashley would get drafted to Raw, causing him to be stripped of the ECW championship and leading to a tournament held to crown a new champion. Punk would make it all the way to the finals, however his opponent Chris Benoit was mysteriously a no-show. So he was replaced by Johnny Nitro, and Nitro ended up defeating Punk, winning the ECW championship. Punk continued to feud with Nitro throughout the rest of the summer, where he would lose 2 out of 3 matches for the ECW championship. It wasn't until the September 4th episode of ECW where Punk would finally beat Nitro, winning the ECW championship. This was a pretty big moment for Punk, however his title reign was pretty forgettable though, as he only defended it on pay-per-views like Unforgiven and Cyber Sunday, both D-tier pay-per-views. After a pretty decent triple threat match at Survivor Series with Miz and Morrison, Punk began feuding with Chavo Guerrero for the ECW championship, leading to the two having what I can only describe as an insane Gulf of Mexico match, where you guessed it, in order to win you have to throw your opponent into the Gulf of Mexico. Punk ended up winning the match, and I couldn't find any source on why this needed to happen. And a month later, Chavo would end up winning the ECW championship in a no DQ match after Edge interfered and speared Punk. Edge was kind of the head of the Guerrero table due to his involvement with Vicky Guerrero, and this ended Punk's title reign at 143 days. After this, Punk would qualify for the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 24. He went on to win the match after trapping Chris Jericho's leg in the ladder. However, something about him winning felt a bit off, almost like it was too good to be true. It seemed like WWE was pushing him more so because of fan reaction, not because they wanted to push him. After this, he briefly teamed up with Kane to feud with Miz and Morrison, as he was still a part of ECW, up until a few weeks later where he was drafted to Raw. And you remember all that shit Edge popped off a few weeks ago? Well, Punk was back to collect. Punk cashes in his Money in the Bank contract, which led to a huge pop in the arena. And his first title defense was later that night after being challenged by JBL. Punk would win the match, but it seemed like every title defense he had, he was the underdog. It was suspected that it wouldn't be a long reign, so every opponent he went against, you might have thought that this was going to be Punk's last title defense. He defended it twice, once against Batista and the other against JBL again. By the way, that's 2 JBL matches I had to sit through. I think I deserve a like. And it was at Unforgiven, just 2 weeks after defending the title against JBL at SummerSlam, where Punk would be confronted by the newly formed Legacy, leading Randy Orton to attack him from behind and deliver a punt kick, causing Punk to vacate the title that same night.
That right there was impressive.
And this was actually pretty disappointing at the time. One of the most over guys in the company finally becomes the world champion and doesn't even lose the title due to injury or an actual title defense. The title was later won by Chris Jericho after spending most of the night getting his ass kicked by Shawn Michaels, and this ended Punk's reign at 69 days. Nice. Punk received his rematch the next week on SmackDown in a steel cage match, and Jericho would win the match. It was painfully obvious they didn't really know what to do with CM Punk at the time. He was still getting a great crowd reaction, but there was still no real direction. And it didn't help that WWE was actually telling some pretty good storylines like Cena and Batista and Shawn versus Jericho. So when Punk did have the title, it felt like all the other main stars had their own thing going on, and the title wasn't a priority. A month later, Punk teamed with Kofi Kingston to beat Legacy members Ted DiBiase and Cody Rhodes for the WWE Tag Team Championships. Just a super forgotten time in the tag team division, and their tag team reign lasted about a month after losing to Miz and Morrison at a house show. Punk remained on television weekly though, and on the January 19th, 2009 episode of Raw, Punk would beat Regal for the Intercontinental Championship, making him the 19th Triple Crown winner in WWE history, and also the fastest person to do it, beating Kevin Nash's record at 203 days. But we'll get to Kevin Nash. Punk defended the title against Regal and John Morrison now, before losing it to JBL on the March 9th, 2009 episode of Raw. And about a month later at WrestleMania 25, great pay-per-view by the way, Punk wins the Money in the Bank ladder match for the second year in a row, being the only man to do so. And this time around, I was a bit more optimistic. Surely they wouldn't fuck it up twice, and they didn't. After winning the briefcase, he was drafted to SmackDown where he would feud with Umaga, and pretty much every time Punk tried to cash in the Money in the Bank contract, Umaga would be there to stop him. You might be wondering why? Well, apparently just attacking people randomly was enough to set up a feud back then.
Stuff just happens.
This led to the two having a strap match at Extreme Rules. The match was won by Punk, and I hope this is somewhat mentioned when he faces Roman one day. Elsewhere, Jeff Hardy and Edge are in the middle of a pretty heated TV-PG rivalry, this being for the World Heavyweight Championship, and they were finally settling their feud with an S-tier ladder match. Hardy would come out with the win, becoming a 3-time world champion, and Punk took the moment to seize the opportunity. And this put Punk in a bit of a tweener role. On one hand, there's no reason he shouldn't have cashed in his Money in the Bank contract, but on the other hand, this was Jeff Hardy, leaving fans, including myself, a bit conflicted. He successfully defended it against Jeff Hardy and Edge in a triple threat match on the June 15, 2009 episode of Raw, and retained it again versus Jeff Hardy via disqualification after kicking the ref in the back, with Punk's excuse being he suffered an eye injury and couldn't see. However, Jeff Hardy was having none of that, and then Punk pulls the I'm straight edge and I'm better than you card, officially turning him heel for the first time in the company.
So I want to see if you can be a heel. Vince, what's the challenge? In 3 months, I'll be the best heel in the company.
The two would face off in a rematch at Night of Champions where Hardy would pick up the win, and after trading the title back and forth over the entire summer, the two would face off in a TLC match at SummerSlam 2009, by far one of Punk's best WWE matches. I'd give it 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles. Punk would come out with the victory to end the pay-per-view, but not before The Undertaker makes his return to chokeslam Punk. His feud with Jeff ended about a week later on SmackDown in the now infamous Steel Cage match. The stipulation being CM Punk's World Heavyweight Championship versus Jeff Hardy's career. Punk would win the match leading to Jeff Hardy's departure, and I know a lot of fans that still hate him for this moment. In actuality, Jeff Hardy violated WWE's wellness policy one too many times, leading to his release. And it's been reported that Jeff Hardy was not too happy with this storyline, as it was pretty transparent with his real-life struggles. The next week on SmackDown, Punk would have the gotcha bitch moment of the year, where he came out to Jeff Hardy's theme song and also dressed up as Jeff Hardy. Just a great way to gain even more heat. He got me. Punk would face off against The Undertaker at Breaking Point, a pay-per-view mostly centered around submission-based matches. And it was here where these two would face off in a, you guessed it, submission match, where Taker would make Punk submit by using the Hell's Gate. However, that move was banned by Vicky Guerrero in 2008 in order to help Edge win the World Heavyweight Championship. And I guess the move was just never reinstated, causing the match to be restarted. Punk immediately puts Taker in the Anaconda Vice, and referee Scott Armstrong would almost instantly call for the bell. And this is another one of WWE's many references to the Montreal Screwjob. It just so happens they were in the same building that night. And the next week, Vince McMahon made the dream match official for CM Punk versus WWE referee Scott Armstrong? So it turns out this is the same referee that Punk kicked a while back while facing Jeff Hardy. And for a majority of his run after this, he was known as a crooked referee. Like, there were times where they would bring him out to do crooked referee stuff. Punk's feud with Taker would lead them into Hell in a Cell, where Punk would lose the World Heavyweight Championship, and he would lose a second opportunity in a fatal 4-way match at Bragging Rights. After this, Punk would head back to the mid-card, and Teddy Long would go for a ride.
Buckle up, Teddy.
Boy, if you don't get...
In late 2009, Punk's character would start to take a more sinister direction. He wanted to be, in his words,
Be wrestling Jesus? Yeah, absolutely.
and because he was no longer the main focus of the show, he had a lot more creative freedom with his character. On the November 27th episode of SmackDown, Punk revealed that he had converted Luke Gallows, formerly known as Festus. Turns out he was just drunk every time we saw him. The straight edge lifestyle did nearly nothing for his career though, as he was mostly just Punk's lackey. And for the next few weeks, Punk would start shaving the heads of Planet audience members while they pledged allegiance to him. And Darren Young that one time, as well as Serena, who was actually a wrestler before appearing in WWE. I probably should have known that. Anyway, Punk would continue to give weekly sermons, including one hilariously during the 2010 Royal Rumble.
Excuse me, it's clobbering time.
And during the first half of 2010, he continued a feud with Rey Mysterio's family, including future Khan Dom. And upon this, we got Punk singing happy birthday to Rey Mysterio's daughter.
Happy birthday!
A move that gave him a lot of heat with the fans. The two would have a pretty forgettable match at WrestleMania, where if Rey Mysterio lost, he would have to join the Straight Edge Society. Mysterio coming out with the win, and this WrestleMania was pretty mid in entirety, other than Taker and Shawn, and even that wasn't as good as their match prior. And Punk and Mysterio would continue to feud over the next two pay-per-views. One match at Extreme Rules where if Punk lost, he would have to shave his head. A match he won due to interference from a returning Joey Mercury. And it wasn't until Over the Limits, where both previous stipulations would be active, where Punk would lose the match and get his head shaved. And afterwards, he began wearing a black mask, A few weeks later, he was in a Fatal 4-Way match at the pay-per-view Fatal 4-Way, go figure, for Jack Swagger's World Heavyweight Championship. This era of SmackDown was disgusting. And later that night, he was attacked by Kane, who was fading anyone he thought was responsible for The Undertaker being incapacitated. And by now, the Straight Edge Society had nearly no momentum. It began dwindling down to kind of a comedy gimmick. Punk would start feuding with the Big Show, he would unmask Punk, and there was a handicap match at SummerSlam between all three members, where Punk would abandon the other two mid-match. And kinda out of nowhere, the group just disbanded. Joey Mercury ended up getting injured, and Serena got released for not living out her straight edge persona in public. There was actually a segment where Punk found her drinking at the bar, and this was supposedly WWE sending her a wake-up call. Punk defeated Gallows in a one-off match on SmackDown, and this was the end of the Straight Edge Society. A pretty disappointing end, but I felt like the stable had run its course. It was never the main focus of the show, but it was something interesting to watch during the mid-card. In October of 2010, Punk was traded to Raw in exchange for Edge.
Officially traded you to SmackDown.
And he participated in the SmackDown vs. Raw match at Bragging Rights, where he suffered a hip injury. They lost. The injury would take Punk out of action for a few months. However, a lot of stars around this time were either getting injured or going part-time, so Vince wanted to keep Punk on television. The solution here was to have Punk be on commentary for the next few months. 2010 as a whole for Punk was a pretty mediocre year, and it left a lot of people, Punk included, wanting WWE to do more with his character. However, I don't think anyone could have predicted the year Punk would have in 2011. And on the last Raw of 2010, Punk would leave the commentary table and attack John Cena, seemingly joining the Nexus as a new member. However, it was revealed that the group was kicking Wade Barrett out, the leader of the group, and replacing him with CM Punk. On January 30th, 2011, Punk and the Nexus would cost Randy Orton his match with The Miz for the WWE Championship. Yeah, you remember all that shit Randy Orton popped off in 2008? Well, Punk was back to collect. And in turn, Randy Orton week by week would punt kick each member of the Nexus. And if you thought John Cena at SummerSlam was bad, the way Randy Orton would take them out one by one made them look like complete chumps. Orton and Punk would have a pretty forgettable WrestleMania match on a super underwhelming WrestleMania card, the highlight being Triple H vs. Undertaker. And the two also had a better match at Extreme Rules the next month, both of which Punk lost. And with multiple L's starting off the year, starting the next month, Punk would go on the run of his life. After pinning WWE Champion John Cena on June 13th, beating Rey Mysterio at Capital Punishment, and then the next night on Raw beating Alberto Del Rio and Rey Mysterio in a triple threat match, Punk would become the #1 contender for the WWE Championship. All of this happening within the same week. And afterwards, Punk had something to say.
July 17th is the day my contract comes to an end. I am leaving with the WWE Championship.
And in this era of WWE, they rarely blurred the lines between reality and kayfabe like this. Because of this and the company standing 10 toes down on their PG stance, WWE had really lost its edge. Also, Edge retired earlier that year. The Punk storyline was a complete breath of fresh air. And we were just getting started as 2 weeks later, during a tables match between R-Truth and John Cena, this was during R-Truth's underrated main event heel run. Remember, he used to smoke cigarettes in people's faces. That was cool, right? Punk would interfere, causing Cena to lose the match. He then grabbed a microphone, headed up the ramp to the top of the stage, and proceeded to change WWE history as we know it. And it's crazy just how many things he called out that we've seen unfold over the past years.
Paul Heyman saw something in me nobody else wanted to admit. You know who else was a Paul Heyman guy? Brock Lesnar. And he split just like I'm splitting. But the fact that Dwayne is in the main event of WrestleMania and I'm not makes me sick. He's a millionaire who should be a billionaire. It's because he surrounds himself with glad-handing, nonsensical yes men like John Laurinaitis. And I'd like to think maybe this company will be better after Vince McMahon's dead. It's going to get taken over by his idiotic daughter and his doofus son-in-law.
Due to this, Punk was given a kayfabe suspension until John Cena requested that he be reinstated. And upon his return, Punk would sit in the middle of the ring holding a megaphone, which I thought was a nice touch.
Do I have everybody's attention now?
And over the following weeks, Punk would cut some of the greatest promos of his career.
You're one of the biggest bullies I have ever met in my entire life.
It was to a point where his promo segments alone were the thing to watch on Raw. A week before the show, Punk and Cena would face off one last time after Cena interrupts Punk's contract negotiation on Raw. And the promo just felt so real, and everything surrounding this match felt so uncertain. Who was gonna win? Do they really mean these promos? Where are the ice cream bars? This was the feud of feuds before Steph Curry and LeBron. At Money in the Bank, Punk would have one of the loudest pops in WWE history. And on the other hand, John Cena would get some of the loudest boos in WWE history. This is a match I used to watch often, and it still holds up. After going back and forth for nearly 40 minutes, with stiff knees, technical wrestling, and counters to set up other sequences of counters, the last two people you'd want walking towards you came down to the ring. Vince McMahon would start motioning for the bell, but unlike the other 1,000 Montreal Screwjob references, John Cena would stop Laurinaitis before getting to the timekeeper's area. He then goes to the bottom of the ramp and tells Vince that he's gonna do it his way. And then he walks into a GTS. Punk pinned Cena, becoming the WWE Champion with 1 hour left on his contract. Suddenly, Vince calls for Alberto Del Rio to cash in his Money in the Bank contract, and Del Rio came out to immediate boos. He enters the ring and immediately gets kicked in the head by Punk. Punk escapes through the crowd, proceeds to go home and put the title in the fridge. I'll give it 5 out of 5 Don Cheadles. This is one of the greatest angles WWE has ever done. Not necessarily just because of the creative part, but because of the effect that it had on the company. So many people who are ready to stop watching, or who already did stop watching, became weekly viewers again. Even I was starting to question why I still watched weekly until the summer of Punk kicked off. And unfortunately, Money in the Bank would be the final time that this storyline made sense. In the time Punk was gone, Triple H would kayfabe take Vince's place. A tournament was set to determine a new champion, which was won by Rey Mysterio, and John Cena would then face Mysterio and beat him for the WWE Championship, who was then interrupted by returning WWE Champion CM Punk. Now, all of this transpiring over a long period of time wouldn't have been too bad. Problem is, this all happened within 2 weeks. Now having two WWE champions, the match was set at SummerSlam for Punk versus Cena, and the build-up of the match really focused on the tension between Punk versus Triple H, as Triple H was announced to be the special referee. Their match at SummerSlam, although not as good as their Money in the Bank match, was still pretty good, all until the end where Cena would have his foot on the ropes while Punk gets the 3 count. This was around the time where it was super rare to see John Cena lose cleanly. After the match, Punk would get attacked by Kevin Nash of all people, and Alberto Del Rio would end up cashing in his Money in the Bank contract, becoming the new WWE Champion. And this is where the summer of Punk was officially fumbled. The next night on Raw, Kevin Nash would explain his reasoning behind the attack, being that he received a text message from Triple H to do so, while Triple H denies any text ever being sent. The two were interrupted by Punk, and he absolutely cooks them both.
Kevin Nash, WTF, thought he was dead, LOL.
A match was set between Kevin Nash and CM Punk, but due to Kevin Nash's many injuries from cutting promos, he was replaced by Triple H. This is where the two would have some of their best promo work against each other, and you can just tell that there was a lack of respect going on for both sides.
This is Phil Brooks talking to Paul Levesque.
Triple H didn't see the real star potential in CM Punk, and Punk didn't see Triple H fit to even make those decisions. The two would have a great match at Night of Champions, even with the interference from Miz and R-Truth, who had recently went rogue because they were unhappy with their booking. Only problem was it was won by Triple H, who hadn't wrestled a match since WrestleMania earlier that year. And though this didn't hurt Punk's popularity with the crowd, it did absolutely nothing for Triple H's career. The Miz and R-Truth were kayfabe fired after attacking a ref.
Ms. Truth, you're fired.
And Punk entered Hell in a Cell versus John Cena and Alberto Del Rio for the WWE Championship. However, this match was also interrupted by Miz and R-Truth. The two were mostly upset because they felt CM Punk was hogging the spotlight. Even though one of them main evented a pay-per-view with John Cena earlier this year, and the other one main evented a WrestleMania against John Cena the last year. Del Rio ended up retaining at Hell in a Cell, and the next month, Punk would lose again while teaming up with Triple H to face R-Truth and The Miz. This brief alliance with Triple H allowed Punk to transfer his hatred towards the establishment to one of WWE's actual problems, John Laurinaitis. Punk would constantly refer to Laurinaitis as Vince's yes man, and with the power of hindsight, we now know, yeah he was, and boy was it awful. Allegedly. He also started feuding with Alberto Del Rio, and at Survivor Series they faced off for the WWE Championship. And after taking all of these losses over the past few months, Punk would finally win the WWE Championship, and this was the beginning of one of the longest reigns in WWE history. And right off the bat, he had some good title defenses against Del Rio and Miz at TLC, Dolph Ziggler at the Royal Rumble, and elsewhere, Chris Jericho had recently returned after a series of video packages. And for the first few weeks, he would come out, hype up the crowd, and then leave. It wasn't until January 30th, 2012, on an episode of Raw where Jericho would attack Punk and Daniel Bryan during a champ versus champ match. This was that brief period where everybody we wanted to be champion was champion. It was nice. Jericho would enter the Elimination Chamber and literally get kicked out by Punk. And shortly after, Punk and Jericho would begin feuding over the claim to be the best in the world and the WWE Championship. The feud would turn personal after Jericho began name-dropping Punk's family. This actually gave the feud more depth than just, I'm better than you. Their match at WrestleMania was pretty good, 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles. However, this was a pretty stacked card. It was actually reported that Vince wanted this to be a 2-minute no disqualification match, meaning both his World Championship matches on that card would have been less than 3 minutes combined. And they may have realized just how many people that may have pissed off, including Punk himself. The two continued to feud after WrestleMania, however their build-up to Extreme Rules was kinda wild. Jericho sends a basket of alcohol to Punk's locker room, and apparently the guy who's never drank in his life was gonna fold because it was in a nicely wrapped basket. Punk was then forced to take a sobriety test live on Raw, where he trolled Jericho pretty much the entire time. Then Jericho vowed to turn him into an alcoholic by the end of their rivalry. Remember when they just wanted to be better than each other? The two would have a Chicago street fight at Extreme Rules. I was there. And it was a much better match than the one at WrestleMania. However, it still wasn't the main event, because the night after WrestleMania, Brock Lesnar and John Cena had a car crash of a match, with Cena coming out with the win. And even though Punk was a super over champion, defending his title in his hometown, he still wasn't the main event. And this trend would continue over the next few pay-per-views. Punk began feuding with Daniel Bryan, who was in the middle of a major heel run after breaking up with AJ. The two would face off at Over the Limit, where Punk would tap out, but not before getting the 3 count on Daniel Bryan. It was a great match, 4 out of 5 Don Cheadles. By the way, this wasn't the main event. That spot went to John Cena versus John Laurinaitis. Cause why the fuck not, right? The Punk and Bryan feud would become a bit of a mess once Kane got involved, and the three began feuding over the affections of AJ and the WWE Championship. It all culminated in a triple threat match, and Punk would get the win after AJ distracts Kane and he carries her to the back while she winks at Punk. This was pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. The best thing to come out of it was AJ became a huge star. And that brings us to the night after Money in the Bank. John Cena would announce that he's cashing in his Money in the Bank the next week on Raw 1000, and Daniel Bryan would propose to AJ.
Will you marry me?
Announcing that their wedding was also going to be on Raw 1000. There have been rumors going around for the entire month that WWE was planning a huge angle for Raw 1000, but no one could confirm what it was. The wedding took place the next week, and shockingly, everything was going according to plan. However, instead of accepting Daniel Bryan's hand in marriage, AJ accepts the general manager position on Raw. While Daniel Bryan was left in the ring embarrassed, Punk would come down to the ring and add a little insult to left at the altar. And then The Rock comes out. The Rock and Punk have a bit of a back and forth, and then Rock turns his attention to clowning Daniel Bryan.
If a homeless lumberjack banged an Oompa Loompa.
But if you paid attention to the background, Punk never takes his eye off The Rock, and his expression completely changes. Cena stops Rock before the main event and lets him know it's going to be them facing off at the Royal Rumble. And Punk and Cena actually had a pretty good match. Punk had been champion for 245 days, and there was so much uncertainty surrounding this match, as you really didn't know who was going to win, until the Big Show comes out. So while the ref is out, the Big Show comes down to the ring and completely destroys John Cena, while Punk is in the corner debating on if he should help or not. And Big Show was actually in the middle of his 27th time turning face or heel. I'm not even kidding. With Cena knocked out, Punk was conflicted on whether he should go for the pin or be a weenie. And logically, he decides to go for the pin. However, Cena kicks out. Punk goes for the GTS and Cena counters it into the ST, retains his championship, making Cena the first unsuccessful cash-in ever. Big Show continues to attack John Cena, with Punk still conflicted on whether he should help or not. Ultimately, he decides to leave the ring, and it's The Rock who decides to come out and help John Cena. Shadowed for 2 years by the two guys laid out on the floor, finally on top. And as the show goes off the air, Jerry Lawler announces CM Punk has turned his back on the WWE Universe. The next week, Punk confronted Lawler, explaining that he turned his back on The Rock, not the WWE fans. He also explained he was tired of being overshadowed before being interrupted by the Big Show, who was then interrupted by John Cena, further proving Punk's point. And this led to the three being placed in a triple threat match at SummerSlam 2012. And this was a pretty fun match, and Big Show was there as well. This is actually my favorite Punk attire. The match ended with Cena putting Big Show in the STF, while Punk also had him in the Koji clutch, a move I wish he did a lot more. The match would be restarted and Punk would end up winning the match after Cena does most of the heavy lifting. In the following weeks, Punk would start demanding respect from AJ Lee, which I'm sure he ended up getting, Jerry Lawler, and Bret Hart. He even ended up having a pretty bloody steel cage match against Jerry Lawler. And on the September 9th, 2012 episode of Raw, Punk attacks John Cena during a Falls Count Anywhere match versus Alberto Del Rio, causing Cena the match, and afterwards, Punk would hop into the passenger side of a car, with the driver being revealed to be Paul Heyman. And this was probably one of the best ways they could have revealed this, but also Punk accidentally gets slapped in the face by the ref while counting, which kind of broke the tension a little bit. Instead of being there to help Punk on the mic, which he clearly didn't need, Paul Heyman was more so there to banter with Punk, adding another layer of legitimacy to Punk's reign.
I am the voice of the voiceless.
Punk and Cena faced off at Night of Champions. This was one of the best matches the two had up until this point, until the end where WWE pulls one of the lamest swerves. For a second, it seemed like Cena walked away with the victory, but shortly after it was revealed that both men's shoulders were on the mat, meaning Punk retains. Over the following weeks, Punk would continuously interrupt legends, doing some pretty good promo work against Jim Ross and Mick Foley. This leading to Punk feuding with Vince McMahon himself. Demanding respect from the chairman, Punk would end up attacking Vince, leading to the two having a match on Raw, where Punk beats the shit out of him even more.
What a maneuver!
It was announced that Cena and Punk would face each other inside Hell in a Cell, but it was reported that Cena was working injured around this time and would have to take the month off to recover. So he was replaced by Ryback, a decision that Punk has stated may have taken years off his life. The two faced off at Hell in a Cell, with Punk winning the match after another crooked referee spot, this time done by Brad Maddox. The less said about him, the better. And Punk facing off against Ryback was the lowest point of his title reign. But with John Cena having Super Cena abilities, he was back by the next pay-per-view at Survivor Series. The three would meet up in a triple threat match, and this ended up being a legendary match, not necessarily because of the match, but because it was ironically overshadowed by these three guys dressed as jewel thieves. And in the moment, the debuting of the Shield was a bit confusing. It was similar to the Nexus, however you knew they were there to help Punk. After the Shield wreaks havoc, Punk is able to pick up the 3 count, leading his reign to be 365 days, and by this point his accumulated injuries caused him to have a partially torn meniscus, leading him to be sidelined for a few weeks. While still showing up on TV with the championship, some might wonder why not let him stay home and rest for a few weeks? Well, you know, ratings. This caused him to not be able to perform in a TLC match versus Ryback, and the match to be held early January on Raw. Punk would come out with the win after interference from the Shield, and this was finally the end of his feud with Ryback, as Ryback would turn his attention towards the Shield. In come Royal Rumble, it was Punk who ended up being the champion to face The Rock. And the lead up to this match was actually pretty good. Punk cut another pipe bomb style promo, however this one was much more based in kayfabe, and he would explain how he was carrying the championship for over a year, just to have part-timers like The Rock and Brock Lesnar come and steal the spotlight from him.
I wrestle physically demanding matches week in and week out.
The two had a pretty underrated match. I don't see this talked about as much. And due to some interference from the Shield, Punk would end up winning the match. However, it was restarted by Vince McMahon, leading to The Rock winning after a people's elbow. This ending Punk's title reign at 434 days. And WWE recognized this as the longest WWE title reign of the modern era. Until, you know, the Bloodline Nation attacked. The next month, Punk and Rock would have a rematch at Elimination Chamber, with The Rock winning, and this was a pretty disappointing end to what was a great title reign. Punk would have one more chance to insert himself in the WrestleMania main event, facing off against John Cena, with Cena putting his Royal Rumble victory on the line. This is where Punk famously hit Cena with a piledriver on Raw. In a 4 out of 5 Don Cheadle match, Cena would come out with the win. Rock ended up facing Cena in what was a poorly received WrestleMania rematch, and the guy who had been holding the championship for over 400 days doesn't get his WrestleMania main event. Instead, Punk would take on what some might think is a bigger spot on the WrestleMania card, facing off against The Undertaker. And there wasn't a lot of time for them to build this match, as 6 weeks before Mania we still didn't even know about it. Unfortunately, the death of Paul Bearer heavily impacted the feud, as it became pretty much the center point of the whole feud. And yes, it made sense storyline-wise, however there are a lot of fans who saw it as pretty insensitive. And that was before Punk dumped a bunch of fake ashes on The Undertaker. Internet discourse aside, come time for the two to actually face off, they had hands down the best match on the card. Taker would come out with the win, and the next night on Raw, Punk would come out for a promo, and then leave for 2 months. finally given time off after accumulating so many injuries over his title reign, making his return in June of 2013 alongside Paul Heyman against Chris Jericho. The 2 out of 3 out of 5 Don Cheadle match at Payback, and shortly after, Punk would turn his sights to the Money in the Bank ladder match, parting ways with Paul Heyman in order to have the opportunity to do his own thing. Punk would participate in an all-star Money in the Bank ladder match consisting of all former world champions, and just as Punk climbed the ladder to go for the briefcase, Paul Heyman cracks him in the back with a ladder. This sudden betrayal led to Paul Heyman and CM Punk feuding throughout the rest of the year, leading to the dream match between Brock Lesnar and CM Punk at SummerSlam. This match was no disqualifications, and it was the first iteration of Brock Lesnar wrestling a smaller opponent. Incredible match, and I think it's one of Brock Lesnar's best matches since returning. After a hellacious match, Brock comes out with the win, and Punk began feuding with 2 more Paul Heyman guys. Punk would trade wins with Curtis Axel and Ryback over the next 2 months, with the feud ending with Punk beating Ryback in a Hell in a Cell match. This feud was incredibly mid, and it was meant for Paul Heyman and CM Punk to kind of rise the stock of Curtis Axel and Ryback, but this did absolutely nothing for any of these guys. Punk at this point was still a fan favorite, but in no way had the same aura he once had. He began teaming up with Daniel Bryan for a short while, mainly putting over the Wyatts and the Shield. He faced off against the Shield in a 3-on-1 handicap match at TLC, where he shockingly won, although still making Roman look strong. And his beef with the Shield was inherited by the Authority, and the next month he had his sights set on the Royal Rumble, entering at number 1. Midway through the match, as Kofi Kingston enters, he rolls in the ring and hits Punk with a clothesline, causing him to be concussed. He continued the match, making it all the way to the Final 4 before being eliminated and chokeslammed through a table by Corporate Kane. And this would be the last time we see CM Punk on WWE television for 10 years. The next night on Raw, a still concussed Punk would show up to television, and instead of making his scheduled appearance, he would instead confront Vince McMahon and Triple H about his recent booking, his lack of time off, and expressing he no longer loved what he was doing, causing Punk to walk out of the company. Punk leaving the company was a shock to most fans, and none of us knew just how long he would be gone or if he would ever come back.
Do you think there's ever a chance we'll see you back in a squared circle?
No.
Vince McMahon was heard on a conference call saying that Punk was taking a sabbatical, and later that year, on Punk's wedding day, while preparing for the wedding, he had received notice that he had been released from WWE. Still harboring a lot of feelings and feeling like he owed fans an explanation, Punk would join longtime friend Colt Cabana on his Art of Wrestling podcast, essentially giving us a tell-all shoot interview on his last few years of WWE. And it was during this interview where Punk tore the company a new one, explaining the stories behind Vince McMahon's lies, the terrible working schedule, and how he had to wrestle through numerous injuries, including a staph infection that was misdiagnosed by WWE doctors. It was like Punk gave us one last pipe bomb before he officially left the industry for good. And his departure had a major impact on WWE moving forward. Punk was the first guy from the indies to really make it in WWE, and this led to the company having much more faith in other independent wrestling stars, like Daniel Bryan and Seth Rollins. Over the following years, Punk would sign a UFC on a multi-fight deal, losing both fights in pretty embarrassing fashion, and causing him to retire from the sport entirely. And over the years, Punk would begin writing for Marvel Comics and acting in a few movies and TV shows. It seemed like wrestling was the furthest thing from his mind, until giving fans a ton of hope that he would one day return. However, this was revealed that it was a Fox show and had no direct affiliation with WWE. Believe it or not, that still didn't stop fans from speculating, especially after Seth Rollins was the first to jump on the hype and immediately began teasing a match with CM Punk. And in CM Punk's first episode on the show, he immediately shut that shit down.
Any constructive advice here for Seth?
Yeah, stop tweeting.
He was also much more critical of WWE's product more than anybody else on the show, probably because he wasn't directly signed to WWE, while others like Renee and Booker T were. And Punk would keep this same energy throughout the show, however it became less and less newsworthy every week. Once fans realized he wasn't coming back in-ring, watching him be critical of a product that he could possibly save wasn't very entertaining. He did, however, have a pretty heated exchange with The Miz on Twitter. Instigation gold medalist Fox Sports tweeted a clip of The Miz mocking CM Punk, and CM Punk directly tweeted The Miz with this: "Jeez." And due to low ratings in the pandemic, the show was canceled on June 26, 2020. And we thought that might be it for Punk involving wrestling. It wasn't until next year on August 20th, 2021, where the wrestling industry would never be the same again, where Punk would finally make his return to AEW?
CM Punk, All Elite Wrestling, it's the thing that the wrestling world is talking about.
The best in the world, CM Punk!
I'm back! Nobody wants
want you here, they never wanted you here.
Someone in AEW has claimed that CM Punk did in fact try to get Colt Cabana fired.
You talk a big game about workers' rights, yeah? Well, you've shown the exact opposite since you've gotten here.
We have irresponsible people who call themselves EVPs, and they spread lies and bullshit. If you have a f***ing problem with me, take it up with me. Let's go.
Reports start coming out of an altercation and a melee in the locker room between CM Punk as well as the EVPs of AEW, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks.
CM Punk has been suspended from AEW.
The AEW Collision will feature CM Punk.
I don't know if you guys heard, but I'm tired of being nice.
Real glass. Crushing the abdomen. Don't cry me a river.
There's been a backstage confrontation between Jack Perry and CM Punk when Punk was coming to the ring for the opening match, or just before he was due to come to the ring.
Today I terminated Phil Brooks, CM Punk. This stems from a backstage incident at AEW All In last Sunday.
I am the truth, and the truth is painful.
During a super turbulent run in AEW, to say the least, Punk was on the receiving end of a lot of hate. Ironically, he became one of the problems that he fought against in the past. Whether he meant to or not, he became the star that came in and overshadowed everybody else. After muffin-induced shoot promos and real backstage brawls, Punk would be released from AEW in late 2023. Once again, the future of Punk's wrestling career was in question. However, the company he once hated was no longer the same company. The work schedule was lighter, the storylines actually made sense. The guy that took away Punk's love for the business was replaced by a guy that was willing to put business first. So on November 25th, 2023, Punk would make his long-awaited return at Survivor Series War Games in Chicago, leading to one of the loudest pops in history, rivaling his one at Money in the Bank in that same building. This also led to a lot of storylines unfolding, like Seth Rollins crashing out at ringside. On the next episode of Raw, Punk would sign his Raw contract and be confronted by Seth Rollins. You remember that match Seth Rollins was teasing back in 2019? Well, he was here to collect. There was so much pre-existing beef between these two, and finally we had creative who knew how to book it. Punk would declare himself for the Royal Rumble, making it all the way to the final two before being eliminated by Cody Rhodes. But the next night on Raw, it was revealed that Punk tore his tricep after receiving a Future Shock DDT from Drew McIntyre, causing him to be out for at least 8 months. Upon Punk's return, it was revealed that Drew McIntyre had stormed out of the building. And after injuring Punk, Drew would explain that this was a moment he prayed for. McIntyre became the biggest hater in WWE and began trolling CM Punk's injury with multiple TikToks, tweets, and even mocking him in his merchandise. With Punk still being injured for most of the year, this gave a lot of time for the story to build up. Punk would be the special guest announcer for the Seth Rollins vs. Drew McIntyre match at Wrestlemania 40. After spending years reinventing himself on the independent scene and spending the entire year of 2020 carrying the company in front of no fans, Drew McIntyre finally wins the World Heavyweight Championship in front of a stadium full of fans. And in his moment of victory, he decided to rub the championship in CM Punk's face, leading to Punk attacking him and Money in the Bank holder Damian Priest to cash in his Money in the Bank contract, causing McIntyre to hold the championship for an embarrassing 5 minutes and 45 seconds. And throughout the year, Punk would continue to cost McIntyre a ton of career-changing opportunities, including the opportunity for him to win a world championship in front of his home country. And in return, Drew would leave Punk a bloody mess on an episode of SmackDown. Once Punk was cleared, the two would have a trifecta of great matches, with Punk losing the first one and winning the last two, culminating in a Hell in a Cell match at Bad Blood. All three matches were highly acclaimed, but none more than the Hell in a Cell match, which fans regard as the match that brought Hell in a Cell back, since the match became so watered down over the years. With the Drew McIntyre feud seemingly behind him, Punk would take a few weeks off to rest from injuries until he was summoned by a wise man. Throughout the entire year, the Bloodline Jr. had been taking over SmackDown, with original Tribal Chief Roman Reigns returning to reclaim his throne. However, clearly being outnumbered, it was time for Roman Reigns to seek help. Searching weeks for those in the locker room who he hadn't completely burned bridges with, Roman was able to reform the original Bloodline group. However, they were still one person short, making the clear obvious choice to be Seth Rollins. However, Seth returned this offer down as he did not want to see Roman Reigns reclaim any power in WWE. Weeks later, with Heyman returning after a Bloodline Jr. attack, he brought along with him CM Punk, who was willing to help Reigns in exchange for a favor down the line. The two teams met at Survivor Series War Games, with the original Bloodline taking the win, bringing Roman Reigns one step closer to reclaiming his throne as the Tribal Chief, and the only Tribal Chief. And this was something that didn't sit right with Seth Rollins, causing him to confront Punk about helping Roman Reigns. This led to the two doing some of the best promo work in both of their careers.
I was the first one through the wall. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me. I loved the place I worked. I just hated the guy in charge. You can't big brother me anymore because I'm the damn big brother.
The story had been there since Seth entered the company, and after over 10 years of underlying beef, the two would finally be able to settle their differences in the ring, making history by main eventing the first Raw on Netflix, with Punk coming out with the win. With Rollins and McIntyre seemingly in his past, and a guaranteed favor from the Tribal Chief in his future, Punk currently has his focus on the Royal Rumble, as he looks to finally main event WrestleMania. Oh no, it's Logan Paul! After eliminating both Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns, Punk was surprisingly eliminated by Logan Paul, just days after clowning Kevin Owens for losing to him.
I have never lost to Logan Paul.
After being eliminated, Seth Rollins would completely crash out on both CM Punk and Roman Reigns ringside. Over the following weeks, both Rollins and Punk would qualify for the Elimination Chamber match, as well as Logan Paul, Damian Priest, Drew McIntyre, and John Cena. And there were so many ways this match could have played out. And this match was absolutely fantastic. Punk would enter last, and it was here where Punk would get his revenge on Logan Paul, go face to face with John Cena for the first time in over 10 years, and eliminate Seth Rollins, causing Rollins to crash out once more. And this crash out would cause John Cena of all people to take advantage and hit Punk with the STF, leading to Cena winning the match and going on to face Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania. And as uncharacteristic as that was for John Cena, nothing would prepare any of us for what would happen not even 20 minutes later. After one of the most historic heel turns of all time, the WWE was set to never be the same again. And the next night on Raw, Punk would come out and cut one of the most heated pipe bombs he's ever cut.
Listen up, Dwayne, you bald fraud!
Starting off by calling out John Cena's alliance with The Rock, referring to both of them as bald frauds, before aiming his attention at Seth Rollins, leading Seth Rollins to interrupt him, and both of them brawling throughout the entire arena. And later that night, the match was set for Seth Rollins versus CM Punk in a steel cage match on the March 10th, 2025 episode of Raw. During his recent crash out on Raw, Punk said that his dream to main event WrestleMania was still alive.
You'll never see CM Punk give up on his dreams of main eventing WrestleMania.
And with a crash out Seth Rollins on the loose, a looming Roman Reigns in the background, and the two guys who stopped him from main eventing a WrestleMania in the past actually teaming up to take over WWE, it's safe to say the cards are stacked against him. But if there's anything we've learned from CM Punk's career over the years, is that anything can happen.